Eleanor Brooks always smiled, even when her knees hurt, even when her phone stayed silent for weeks, even when her own family spoke to her like she was already gone. At 68, Eleanor lived alone in the small white house on Maple Street, the same house she and her late husband had bought 40 years ago when the neighborhood was nothing but dirt roads and dreams. Every morning, she watered her plants. Every evening, she waited for a call that rarely came. "Grandma, I'm busy." "Mom, we'll visit next month." "Eleanor, you worry too much." That's what they always said. Especially Karen. Karen Miller, her daughter-in-law, had a voice that sounded sweet on the surface but sharp underneath, the kind of voice that smiled while cutting you slowly. "Oh, Eleanor," Karen would say during rare visits, looking around the house, "isn't it hard managing all this at your age?" Eleanor would just smile. "Oh, I manage." What Karen didn't know was that Eleanor had managed far bigger things her entire life. But for now, she played the role they expected, the harmless old grandma. The day Eleanor collapsed in her kitchen was the day her family decided she was no longer human. She was property. It was a Tuesday morning. Eleanor reached for her tea, and suddenly the world tilted. Her cup shattered on the floor. When she woke up in the hospital, the first face she saw wasn't her son's. It was Karen's. "Oh, Eleanor," Karen sighed dramatically, "you really scared us." Us. But Eleanor noticed something strange. Karen wasn't worried. She was calculating. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor was moved into a nursing home she never chose. "It's temporary," Karen promised, "just until you recover." Temporary turned into months. The room smelled like disinfectant and forgotten people. And that's when Eleanor overheard the conversation that changed everything. Karen, on the phone, laughing. "Once the papers are finalized, the house is basically ours." Eleanor closed her eyes and smiled, because they had made one fatal mistake. They thought she was weak. Eleanor Brooks had learned something important in the nursing home. People talk when they think you can't hear, and Karen talked a lot. The nursing home was called Golden Meadows, but there was nothing golden about it. Peeling wallpaper, overworked nurses, old people staring at walls like they were waiting for permission to disappear. Eleanor sat by the window every afternoon, wrapped in the same gray cardigan, hands folded neatly in her lap. To anyone watching, she looked exactly how Karen wanted her to look: broken, confused, finished. But inside Eleanor's mind, numbers were moving, accounts, dates, signatures, patterns. 3 weeks after Eleanor was moved in, a young nurse named Rachel started working the evening shift. Rachel noticed Eleanor right away, not because Eleanor complained, she never did, but because Eleanor watched everything. "You used to work in finance, didn't you?" Rachel asked one night while adjusting Eleanor's IV. Eleanor smiled softly. "What makes you think that, dear?" "The way you look at paperwork," Rachel said, "like it's lying to you." That made Eleanor laugh, a real laugh, the first one in months. "I was an accountant," Eleanor said quietly, "for 35 years. Rachel froze. "Wait, like professionally?" Eleanor nodded. Rachel looked down at Eleanor's thin hands. "These hands balanced corporate books?" she whispered. Eleanor leaned back. "And put a few men in prison." Rachel swallowed. From that moment on, Rachel started paying closer attention. David, Eleanor's son, visited once. Once. He stood awkwardly near the door, checking his phone. "Karen says this place is good for you," he said. Eleanor nodded. "I'm sure she does." He didn't notice the bruise on Eleanor's arm, didn't notice her missing ring, didn't ask how she was sleeping. Before leaving, he hesitated. "The house is, being handled," he said. "You don't need to worry." Eleanor looked up at him. "David," she said gently, "did you read the papers you signed?" David frowned. "Karen said—" Eleanor smiled. "That's what I thought." 2 days later, Karen arrived with a man in a suit, a lawyer, not Eleanor's lawyer. "Just a few forms," Karen said brightly, setting papers on the tray table. "Power of attorney, medical stuff." Eleanor adjusted her glasses. She read slowly. Karen shifted impatiently. "You trust me, right?" Karen asked. Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law, the woman who had slept in her guest room, who had eaten her food, who now wanted her erased. Eleanor picked up the pen and signed. Karen exhaled in relief. What Karen didn't notice was Eleanor signing exactly how she wanted her to. Shaky, uneven, inconsistent, a signature that screamed not of sound mind. Rachel, standing near the door, noticed. Jake Brooks wasn't supposed to be there. Karen had forbidden it. But one Sunday afternoon, Eleanor heard a familiar voice. "Grandma?" Her heart cracked open. Jake stood there, taller than she remembered, eyes full of guilt. "They said you didn't want to see me," he whispered. Eleanor pulled him into a hug. "I always want to see you." Jake looked around the room. "This place sucks," he muttered. Eleanor smiled sadly. Jake leaned in closer. "Dad says you're confused now." Eleanor held his face in her hands. "Jake," she said softly, "listen to me very carefully." Jake nodded. "I am not confused," Eleanor said. "I am patient." Something shifted in Jake's eyes. That night, Eleanor asked Rachel for a favor. "Could you bring me my personal box from storage, the one labeled E. Brooks?" Rachel hesitated. "Family usually—" "They forgot it existed," Eleanor said. Inside the box was Eleanor's real life: tax records, property deeds, old bank statements, and a small black notebook. Rachel watched Eleanor flip through pages filled with dates and names. "This," Rachel whispered, "this is evidence." Eleanor nodded. They rushed. Greed always rushes. Back at Maple Street, Karen redecorated the house. She sold Eleanor's furniture online. She hosted wine nights. She told people Eleanor didn't even recognize her anymore. She even joked once, "Honestly, it's like she's already gone." But she kept one thing, the house, because Karen had plans. Rachel didn't tell anyone when she contacted Mr. Thomas Reed, an elder law attorney. He came to see Eleanor quietly, no family present. He listened. He read. He smiled. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "do you know how many mistakes your daughter-in-law made?" Eleanor smiled back. "Enough?" Mr. Reed chuckled. "She committed at least 6 forms of fraud." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Good." Karen's phone rang one evening, unknown number. "Mrs. Miller?" a calm voice asked. "This is regarding a review of your recent property transfer." Karen laughed. "Oh, that's all handled." The line paused. "Then you won't mind the audit." The line went dead. Karen's smile faded. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected: fear. Back in the nursing home, Eleanor sat by the window. Jake sat beside her. "They think they won," Jake said. Eleanor sipped her tea. "No," she replied calmly, "they think I'm quiet." She looked at her grandson. "Jake, are you ready to see what your grandma can do?" Jake smiled, and far away, Karen Miller stared at her phone as the first domino began to fall. Karen Miller slept peacefully the night her world started to collapse. That's the funny thing about karma. It doesn't knock, It doesn't warn you, it just shows up with paperwork. At 9:17 a.m., Karen's card was declined at a coffee shop. She laughed at first. "Try it again," she told the barista. Declined. Her smile tightened. She opened her banking app. Account temporarily restricted. Karen frowned. She tried another card. Same message. For the first time in years, Karen felt something twist in her stomach. This wasn't an accident. David called her 5 minutes later. "Our joint account is frozen," he said, breathless. "I can't access anything." Karen snapped. "It's probably a system error." But she already knew. System errors don't hit 3 accounts at once. She grabbed her keys. "We're going to the bank," she said. The bank manager was polite, too polite. "There's an ongoing review," he said carefully. "Review of what?" Karen demanded. "Property transfer records and inconsistencies in power of attorney documentation." Karen's throat went dry. "That paperwork was legal," she snapped. The manager slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies, signatures, dates, medical notes. One line circled in red. "Client not of sound mind, questionable consent." Karen stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "My mother-in-law's confused." The manager didn't blink. Then why did she sign with 3 different signatures? Silence. Eleanor sat with Mr. Reed, calm as ever. "First freeze is temporary," he said. "It makes them nervous." Eleanor nodded. "And nervous people make mistakes," she replied. Jake grinned. "You're scary, Grandma." Eleanor patted his hand. "Only to bad people." 2 days later, a white envelope arrived at Maple Street. Karen opened it casually. Then her hands started shaking. Notice of tax audit. She dropped into a chair. David read over her shoulder. This is serious," he whispered. Karen's mind raced. She had adjusted numbers for years, just small things, nothing anyone noticed. Until now. That night, Karen exploded. "Your mother did this," she screamed. "She's playing games." David stared at her. "You said she was confused." Karen froze. David said quietly, "You made me sign those papers. You said it was normal." Karen's control cracked. "If you had been a better son, I wouldn't have had to." The words hung in the air. Something broke in David. A courier arrived the next morning. Legal documents. Notice of fraudulent transfer, property subject to repossession. Karen read it 3 times. "This is my house," she whispered. "No," David said slowly. "It's my mother's." Karen looked at him, eyes wild. "You're choosing her over me?" David didn't answer. He didn't have to. At Jake's school fundraiser, Karen tried to keep up appearances, but whispers followed her. "Did you hear? Something about fraud. The IRS is involved." Karen's smile felt glued on. Her phone buzzed. Bank appointment canceled. Account under investigation. She excused herself and rushed to the bathroom, locked the stall, and cried. Mr. Reed filed the petition. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, coercion. Eleanor signed it with a steady hand, for the first time in months. Karen's phone rang late that night. Unknown number. "This is Detective Alvarez. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Karen's knees gave out. Eleanor watched the sunset from her window. Jake sat beside her. "She's scared now," Jake said. Eleanor smiled softly. "No," she replied. "She's exposed." She leaned back. "And tomorrow, she loses everything." Karen Miller always believed the worst thing that could happen to her was being embarrassed. She never imagined being exposed. It was 6:42 a.m. when someone knocked on the door of the Maple Street house. Not a polite knock, not a neighbor knock, a knock that meant consequences. Karen froze. David, half asleep, walked toward the door. "Who is it?" he called. "Police," a voice answered. Karen's heart slammed into her ribs. 2 officers stood outside. One held a folder. "Karen Miller?" the taller one asked. Karen stepped forward slowly. "You are being investigated for financial exploitation of an elder," the officer said calmly. "You are also required to come with us for questioning." "This is insane," Karen said, forcing a laugh. "My mother-in-law is confused." The officer opened the folder. "She's very clear," he said, "and she has receipts." Karen was handcuffed in front of her own house. Neighbors watched. Phones came out. The house Karen thought she owned watched silently. David stood on the porch, stunned. "Wait," he said. "You said everything was legal." Karen turned back, eyes wild. "You let this happen," she hissed. "You chose her." The officers led her away. David sank onto the steps. For the first time, he saw his wife clearly. The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. Eleanor Brooks walked in slowly, supported by Jake. Heads turned. Some people whispered, "That's her, the sweet old lady." Karen sat at the defense table, pale and furious. She avoided Eleanor's eyes. Karen's lawyer stood. "Mrs. Brooks has documented cognitive decline," he argued. "She willingly transferred authority." Mr. Reed stood next. He placed medical records on the stand. "No diagnosis of incompetence," he said calmly. "In fact, Mrs. Brooks was intentionally isolated." He held up the signatures. 3 different signatures in 1 week, he said. Classic coercion. Karen clenched her fists. The judge looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "do you understand why you're here?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes," she said. "My daughter-in-law tried to erase me." The room went silent. Eleanor continued. "I raised my son to be kind. I trusted the woman he married." She turned toward Karen. "And you thought being old meant being stupid." Karen looked down. The judge didn't hesitate. "Power of attorney is revoked," she ruled. "All property transfers are nullified." Karen gasped. "Charges of elder abuse and financial exploitation will proceed." The gavel struck. Karen's world ended in one sound. Reporters gathered. "Mrs. Brooks, how does it feel to win?" one asked. Eleanor smiled calmly. "I didn't win. I survived." Jake squeezed her hand. Later, David stood in Eleanor's room at Golden Meadows. "I failed you," he said quietly. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. He swallowed. "Can you forgive me?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Forgiveness, she knew, was earned. That night, Eleanor packed her things. Golden Meadows was no longer her home. Jake looked at her. "What happens to Karen now?" he asked. Eleanor paused. "She gets to live with the consequences," she said. She picked up her coat, "and we get to live free." Karen Miller used to believe consequences were for other people. People without charm, without excuses, without someone else to blame. She was wrong. The courtroom was quieter than before. No arguments, no drama, just facts. Karen stood before the judge, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow. "Karen Miller," the judge said, "you knowingly exploited an elderly family member for financial gain." Karen's lawyer tried one last time. "She acted under stress." "Sit down," the judge snapped. Karen's breath caught. The judge continued, "You will serve
18 months, she said. Restitution will be paid in full. Karen's knees buckled. This time, no one caught her. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in front of the house on Maple Street. Her house. The paint was different, the garden neglected, but the bones were the same. Jake unlocked the door. "Welcome home, Grandma." Eleanor stepped inside slowly. She touched the wall. "I thought I'd die before seeing this again," she whispered. Jake shook his head. "Not you," he said. "You're unstoppable." Eleanor smiled. David came by one evening. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, like a guest. "I'm getting divorced," he said. Eleanor nodded. "I know." "I don't expect forgiveness," he added, "but I want to be better." Eleanor looked at her son. "I hope you are," she said gently, "but I won't save you anymore." David understood, and for the first time, he respected her. That night, Jake sat with Eleanor at the kitchen table. "Dad wants me to move back in with him," Jake said. Eleanor waited. "I told him no," Jake continued. "I want to stay here with you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't choose because of me," she said. Jake smiled. "I am choosing me." Months later, Eleanor started something new, a small foundation helping seniors who had been financially abused. Rachel volunteered. Mr. Reed helped legally. Eleanor spoke at meetings. People listened because she wasn't just a survivor, she was proof. One afternoon, Eleanor received a letter, return address, State Correctional Facility. She read it once, then twice. Karen apologized, blamed stress, blamed fear, blamed everyone but herself. Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in the trash. Some chapters don't need replies. On a warm summer evening, Eleanor sat on her porch, Jake beside her. Fireflies flickered. "You ever regret it, going after them?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "No," she said. "I regret staying quiet for so long." She looked at him. "Promise me something." Jake nodded. "Never let anyone make you feel small, especially when they mistake kindness for weakness." Jake smiled. "I learned that from you." Eleanor leaned back. The house was quiet, but this time it wasn't lonely. They thought she was just a sweet old grandma. They were right. She was sweet. She just wasn't weak.